In the US, a 2023 study suggests many dog owners have doubts about vaccines, and some of their concerns can be traced back to misinformation. Matt Mata is an associate professor of health policy at Boston University. And on this side of the border, we have Scott Weiss, a vet and professor at the Ontario Veterinary College at the University of Guelph. Matt and Scott, great to have you on the program today.
Thanks for having us.
Matt, I'll start with you. You published a study called Sick as a Dog, which looks at, dog owners and their beliefs about vaccines. What did you find?
Yeah, so about half of Americans hold at least some skeptical views toward vaccinating their pets. We found that notably close to 1 in 3 Americans felt that the rabies vaccine could cause their pets to develop a form of canine autism, which is not a real diagnosis that most veterinary professionals would recognize, and that ultimately these views lead to people being a bit more likely to say that they would forego vaccinating their pets if given the chance.
So let me ask you, Scott, you're the vet in the room. We're hearing this new term, pautism. Is vaccine hesitancy around that something you're seeing in Ontario?
We don't have a lot of information on hesitancy. We know it exists. We know there's some similarities with human vaccine hesitancy, but it's a different area too. And some of the reasons for people being hesitant are different. We certainly don't have anything that would suggest there's an autism equivalent in dogs or that it's linked to vaccination, but these things get ingrained in the public and it's hard to dispel misinformation like that.
Yeah, so where are these ideas coming from, Matt? Because I know your research is looking at the pipeline here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question from my research and work from my colleagues that the COVID-19 pandemic really changed the game. The way that Americans feel about the COVID-19 vaccine and the hesitancy that some brought with them following these mass vaccination campaigns has spilled over to shape the way that people feel about seasonal flu vaccination, vaccines for kids, and ultimately whether or not they want to vaccinate their pets. So we see a very clear transmission of those attitudes from the pandemic to the way that people feel about vaccinating their pets.
So Scott, I wonder if that's happening in Canada too. Like, how often are your colleagues having vaccine skeptical people bring in their pets?
I'd say it's a little less common in Canada, and I think the reasons can be a little bit different between Canada and the US, been talking to people there. We've always had some degree of hesitancy, fatigue. There are various reasons why people can be reluctant to get their animals vaccinated. But I think, as was said, the COVID pandemic has changed the game quite a bit and has brought in mistrust as a much broader component, mistrust of rules in general, mistrust of pharma, mistrust of veterinarians, where in the past, I think we've had more concern about the animal health aspect and people looking for alternative strategies or seeing things that scared them online. Now we're starting to see a little more drifting over to the conspiracy, the mistrust, the misinformation driving.
It sounds like it's making your job harder.
Well, it makes it hard because we can't just address it one way. If it was just a matter of people are afraid because of adverse events, we can educate that a little bit, right? We can bring in data, we can reassure them. But the first step of that vaccine hesitant owner of an animal is we've got to figure out why. Because if they're dogmatically opposed to vaccines, they're wary of pharma, they're wary of costs, they're concerned about adverse events, they don't trust vets. These are all very different situations and they need a very different response. So we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach.
Matt, when you look at misinformation online around pet vaccines, what is the one thing that most concerns you?
One thing that I think is really important for folks to understand is that there is a growing link between the Make America Healthy Again movement led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here in the United States and the way that people feel about vaccinating their pets and what they put in their pets' bodies. Some of the key figures in the pet vaccine skepticism movement are folks who have very close ties to the Make America Healthy Again movement here in the United States. And that is very much borne out in our research when we see a tight link between the way that people feel about vaccinating people and the way that they feel about vaccinating their pets. That correspondence not only increases the breadth of this movement, but makes it easier for people's political feelings to influence the way that they feel about vaccinating.
So Scott, we talked to a pet owner, Erica, who has not vaccinated her dogs. And one of the claims that she says is that, large vet chains are pushing more vaccines to line their pockets. It's, big conglomerates making lots of money. What would you say to her?
Well, I think that's the concern we've had for years because that's what people see. And I think there's been this disconnect, and part of it's the veterinary profession's fault is we focused on vaccines, where we want to see the animal regularly. We want to see your dog or cat every year so we can identify problems because your dog doesn't necessarily tell you what's going on, right? So we find things, and we've often driven that by saying you need to come in for your vaccines, and then we're going to find out all these other things. And that gets people focusing on all I'm doing at the vet is getting vaccines. It's costing me this much versus we're approaching this as a comprehensive health exam, and you'll get vaccines if you need them, but we're doing everything else. So we've poorly kind of positioned ourselves in healthcare and veterinary medicine, really focused on vaccines. And when people get hesitant with vaccines, that really affects the overall healthcare. And I think the other challenges we have, we do vaccinate animals more than we do people. And there are a few reasons for that. Some of that is the disease risk they have. Some of that is what we know about the vaccines and how well they protect. And some of this is the unknown. And we don't have data that say you can vaccinate, less in some situations. We've changed how we vaccinate. We're vaccinating less than we used to 20 years ago. We probably could do even less. But if we don't have evidence to support that, it becomes very difficult to make changes.
So are you telling me that we could be over vaccinating right now?
Well, I know if over-vaccinating is really the word, but for example, we vaccinate against some diseases every 3 years. And we do that because we know it works if we do it every 3 years. We don't know it doesn't work if we do it 4 or 5 years. So there may be situations where we could go longer with our intervals, but when the vaccine label doesn't say that, when the guidelines don't say that, when we don't have supporting data, it's hard to recommend it because if I recommend that, I'm going against the data that I have.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there is some nuance and context there, but it sounds like there might be different options if we have more data. We don't have the data right now, so we got to be extra cautious. I just want to ask about the risk because I think that is a really key part of this. What is the risk to other animals if, let's say, a dog is not vaccinated, Scott?
It's there. The big risk for unvaccinated animals is to that animal. So if I don't vaccinate my dog against distemper, for example, my dog's more likely to get distemper and is more likely going to die. So reducing vaccination of dogs isn't going to let distemper establish itself in dogs in Canada because it's already here. But it's going to cause more disease in those dogs that are unvaccinated. And we can get spillover effects because just like in people, in people, we try to vaccinate everyone so we protect the people that can't be vaccinated. And we have the same situation in dogs and cats with a young puppy, for example. I can vaccinate it, but only at a certain age, and I can't be confident it's protected until it's at least 4 months old. So the more dogs we have that get distemper because they're not vaccinated, the more risk we have of infecting those unvaccinatable puppies and killing them. And some of these diseases can be fairly devastating. So we do have spillover effects into other animals. And for diseases that can go from dogs and cats to people, we have a human spillover risk as well. So it gets very complex.
And is that spillover risk very high?
It's probably very low overall for humans.
Okay.
There are a couple of things we'd be concerned about, but some of them are high consequence. So the risk of problems with rabies is low. Your average dog or cat is fairly low risk of exposure, but if it gets rabies, it's going to die. And if it gets rabies, there's going to be a public health investigation of who it might have infected. That gets very time consuming, very expensive. People that have been exposed need post-exposure prophylaxis. So even if no one got rabies from the dog, we're often seeing tens or more thousands of dollars being put into this. So there are significant impacts when we see diseases that were vaccine preventable.
Matt, I haven't forgotten about you. Listening to all that context and nuance, how should people maneuver the information that's out there when it comes to vaccines for their pets?
There's so much misinformation out there. And I think that listening to folks like Scott is one of the best things that pet owners can do. One common piece of misinformation that I see out there quite often is, well, my pet doesn't interact with many other pets. Why should I have to vaccinate my dog or my cat? Why can't I just test every so often to see whether or not my dog or cat has antibodies to fill in the blank disease? And as Scott rightly noted, the issue here is that your dog, your pet can come into contact with infectious diseases in ways that you may not recognize immediately. And that poses a public health risk, not just to our four-legged friends, but to the people who take care of them. both their parents and veterinary professionals. So I think it makes a lot of sense for folks to have those conversations with their veterinarian and for veterinarians to engage meaningfully on these issues and talk to people about them, try to walk them through, just like Scott is right now. To me, this is the best kind of conversation that we can have.
Scott, anything you'd like to add?
The worst thing you can do with someone that's vaccine hesitant is dismiss them, right? If nothing else, they need to feel heard. Because if you dismiss them, we lose trust and we lose maybe the client, but we lose the ability to do other things with their healthcare. So we need to engage them. And at some point, you might just say, okay, well, this isn't a hill I'm going to die on, right? You don't want to vaccinate. That's fine. Here are the issues. We'll just document in your record you didn't want to. And here are the things I really want to worry about. So maybe I won't worry about this vaccine, but I really want you to get a rabies vaccine. But we have to be able to have these discussions.
We all got to talk to each other a little more. Matt, Scott, great to have you both on the program today.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for having us.